Hey everybody, welcome back, and it's great to see you all again. I'm going to try and keep this particular video short, mostly because it's one of those videos that I really want people to take away just a couple of key points, and honestly, more importantly, this is a hard subject. It's a difficult thing to talk about, and it's a very somber one, and so I don't want to drag people through a very lengthy video just with this kind of like somber tone. Having said all that, though, this is a very important video. If you're watching this, I'm going to kind of assume that you're already on your journey. Perhaps you are just starting out, but I think most people that are watching this are probably on some path. And certainly I'm making this for writers and aspiring authors, but this could be, I think is true for any type of creative. Anyone who is, I guess, struggling on their way to sort of make it in their particular industry. So 10 years to this exact month, I decided that I wanted to be a published author. It was something that I've always enjoyed. I've always loved reading, and I certainly love writing. But it was never something that I really took seriously until around January of 2014. And having devoted basically a decade to this process, I finally now have my first book coming out next month. Unfortunately, at least for my past self, this book is going to be self-published. This was a novel that I had pitched a lot over the past couple of years. And if you follow this channel, you know the whole drama with potentially having a deal and it kind of going away and all that. Long story, basically I could not find a home for it. It was a novel that I believed in, that I loved. I simply could not find a home for it. And so now I am set to release it next month on my own. This video isn't going to be about taking an alternative path towards your dreams or readjusting expectations or anything like that. It's going to be more about asking the question, how do you stay motivated along this path? When you know that you have years and years and years ahead of you after having sunk years and years and years of prior work already in to build up your skill to where it is, how do you stay motivated to keep moving forward? The publishing journey is full of rejection. Yes, we all know that, right? It's one of those things that we logically can intuit, and yet emotionally, those rejections begin to weigh on you. It's not so much that a particular story was not a right fit for somebody. It's more of the mounting rejections that you're getting and the questions of, how much more time do I have left? How much more time do I have to offer? And do I want to offer to this? If you get 8 books rejected, and that's, I believe, pretty close to where I'm at in those 10 years, if you lose on 8 books, how do you keep motivated to go for that 9th one? How do you stay passionate about your work when you have a track record of defeat after defeat after defeat staring back at you, and your part of your brain is asking you yourself, how much more time do I have? How much more do you want to put into this? Certainly, it would be easier just to give up. It would be much more practical in a sense to sort of put it aside and to look to something else. A decade of work, well, that's a very long time. It's not like you're quitting on day 1 or even year 1 or 2 when you're kind of still a rookie and still a newbie. You've got some time in now. A decade into this process, you have some experience. And if you keep on getting those no's, how much more do you want to go? Have you not already given yourself that old college try? Have you not already pushed yourself to a point where you can say, yeah, I definitely have been giving it my all throughout this time in this industry? And for me, this has been a question that I've had to ask myself somewhat frequently for about the past 4 or 5 years. I've said before that those first 5 years of my writing, I already considered that a wash. I, going into the process, had considered that before year 5, you can't expect yourself to be at a point where you're going to get something published. It's just not a feasible thing. Writing is a very difficult art form, despite I think how lightly people tend to view it. And to think you were going to get anything published before 5 years in is a very, very unrealistic expectation. But after year 5, I considered myself to be at about even odds. I figured there's probably a 50-50 chance at this point that a story gets picked up or it doesn't. My reasoning was that by year 5, I have enough skill to be published. I could look at my work and I could read it, and I could see how my work was in comparison to what I was reading through published authors already. There's so many ugly literary children out there, right? There's so many bad books that have been published that by year 5, I was looking at what I had written and was realizing what I've written is better. This is obviously my opinion, but the quality of my prose and the richness of my stories was better than some of the books that I was reading that had been traditionally published. And so I figured year 5, I'm at even money. Probably next couple of years, something is going to happen. The problem was by year 6, year 7, year 8, this wasn't happening. I wasn't getting those acceptance letters that like I was hoping for. I really wasn't even getting much traction with any agents at all, to be honest. It was only around the past 2 years that I had really any sort of traction at all with any kind of potential, hey, let's do a Zoom call and talk, or hey, listen, send us over your manuscript, let's take a look at it. That's a very, very long time. And while I think some people can take a lot of happiness from that, they can take a lot of that experience as a positive one by just getting a bit more than just a traditional no. It weighed on me. It was something that had definitely kind of forced me to really reconsider what I was doing. That at year 8, I was only getting partials and only getting these very basic sort of, hey, let's kind of consider it nods. And even now, I don't necessarily know what's going to be next. Yes, I'm self-publishing this first novel, but I'm already preparing to query my next novel, and who's to say that gets picked up, or what happens if that gets rejected? These are certainly questions that have weighed on me even at this point, now that I'm looking at it, a decade going forward here. And so with all this, my point has been that how does one move forward? Even through all of those years there, how was I able to keep pushing forward as a writer amidst the rejection? And how do we as writers in general and creative types find the motivation to keep going forward with our work? So over, I'd say the past few months, but certainly just even this past week, I've begun to really rethink that. I've begun to sort of go back and kind of re-examine why I keep doing this and why I have at these different points always gone back to I'm going to continue the process. Why I haven't just thrown the towel back when it was year 5 or 6 or 7. And my initial assumption for a lot of this had been that it was just sunk cost fallacy, that I was simply going forward because there was seemingly no other reason to stop. I was too invested. And at times I have kind of joked that being a writer is a bit like being a guy in prison and suddenly getting released after a decade or 15 years or 20 years and not knowing what to do. You spent so much time on the inside, you spent so much time at the keyboard as a writer that you look at the rest of the world and you go, well, what else is there? What else could I do? And the idea of doing something else, the idea of stopping to write and focusing your time on a new hobby or a new career prospect, it's so daunting that out of that fear and out of that unknown and that uncertainty, you kind of just keep going with the writing just because. But as I've thought back to those times when I was faced with the decision to stop or to move forward, I feel like I always came back to two different reasons to stick with my writing career. And so that's what I'm going to talk about right now. And hopefully, maybe these reasons resonate with you. And maybe if you're on this journey, it can be a way to help you reevaluate whether you do want to move forward with your career or whether at this point you're ready to draw the line in the sand and say, no, I've given it my all here for X amount of time, and I'm happy to simply walk away. All right, so let's start with the first reason, which I've summarized as I believed in my current project. When I was facing these rejections and facing these questions of how many more books are you going to write or how many more projects are you going to work on before you're done, I thought back to the project that I was working on at the time, the one that had been rejected. And every time I go back to it, even if I could see the flaws in it, I would think to myself, this project is awesome. This project was worth it. It was worth me putting in the year, 2 years, whatever it might have been, to get this done. It was worth my time and effort. It was not wasted hours that I spent writing this up and editing the story, because there is so much heart and there is so much depth and exploration that I put into this story that, yes, it may not have been marketable. Yes, it may not have been the right fit for a lot of people. Yes, I might have written it in a more experimental way, but the heart of the story is so strong, and I believed in the story so much that it was worth my time to pursue the act itself, regardless of the outcome. In fact, my novel Crease, before I decided to self-publish it, I had in fact said something very similar to myself. I had told myself, well, do you like the story? Do you really believe in it? Do you find it enjoyable? And do you find that other people may like it? And so, reflecting on that, I had said yes to every one of those questions. And that basically was the catalyst for why I decided to go forward with self-publishing. I became less focused on the outcome, less focused on the process of getting the story out there, and became much more focused on the fact that the story that I wrote would in some fashion be out there. And so if you're going through these questions, if you're debating whether you should move on or not with this career, consider your immediate story. Don't think so much in the macro sense of how your career is going to be. Consider your current project and if you believe in it. And if you do, if you really love the story, even if you can't find a home for it, consider that the win. Consider that the fact that you created this story, that you have crafted this sort of beautiful tale, at least to you, a win. That this was something that didn't exist before. This was something that only was in your head, and now it's out there. Maybe no one else sees it, but it is out there. And certainly the fact that you created something was a much better use of your time than having just wasted it playing video games or watching television or what have you. This is better. You've actually added something to the world. Again, even if it's only you, because you've taken something that you conceived in your head and actually made it a reality in some fashion. And so if you believe in your projects, I would really, really, really use that as a test to kind of see whether you should go forward or not. Because if you do, at least for myself, I think sticking with it is a very admirable and a very wise thing to do. And so that was my first motivation. That was, for me, my first reason to always go forward. It was not always something I had considered. It wasn't like every time I had that doubt, I was brought back away from the abyss of quitting because I believed in projects. But that was the most frequent. That was the most often cited reason for myself to keep going forward. And at times when that wasn't the motivation, when I was kind of brought back to the writing chair for a different reason, the second most frequent reason that I found, and I think this has to be true of any writer, but certainly for myself, this was a huge thing to keep me going. It was remembering that I loved the process, that I was still getting a lot of enjoyment out of creating these stories. Not every day at the keyboard was fantastic. That's just not feasible. And in fact, I often talk about the fact that I probably have more mediocre days than anything else. But if you were to structure it, it's a lot of mediocre days and quite a few bad ones, and then just a few really amazing days at the keyboard. And so more often than not, I would go to the keyboard and have either a kind of meh experience that day writing, or potentially even bad day. But I loved the process of creating. I enjoyed the thrill I would get at going through and fixing a sentence or tweaking a little thing here or there, at finding an awesome metaphor or this very cool turn of phrase. That kept me going. That for me was often what would keep me going for a week or even more. Is just if I had one good day where I had just a few things that I would deem as perfection, or at least a glimpse of perfection. That for me was enough joy to keep me moving forward here. And this is to say nothing of just the simple joy in being at a quiet desk creating. Just the act of being at the writing desk and just creating words is its own sort of tranquility. It's kind of like a form of meditation almost, in a way. For me, it just brings a sense of calmness throughout my day. And so I found that even if I was getting rejected, even if my stories weren't getting picked up, I found times that I really love writing to stick with it, to view it simply as almost a form of therapy, almost a way to kind of keep my sanity amidst a sort of ever-growing crazy world that we seem to find ourselves in these days. For me, it was just the thing to kind of distract me from the greater world. And that for me was, I think, a huge motivator to just keep me from just throwing in the towel altogether and stopping the entire writing process. And so if you are watching this, I hope that those two examples might help you along your path. That at times when perhaps you feel that discouragement and that sense of wanting to stop because nobody likes your stories and nobody's picking it up and you're never going to find a home for it and all that negative chatter, amidst all that, I really hope that you can perhaps better re-examine that the process doesn't necessarily need to define you, that the outcome doesn't need to be the motivation. I think for a lot of us, we can get lost in the process of what we do because we're always looking so far ahead at our goal. We're looking so far ahead at that publication, at that acceptance, at finally catching our break, because we're facing realities that unfortunately are catered to it. We build our lives around our objectives. We make sacrifices in pursuit of our goals. Certainly myself, I've made many sacrifices in pursuit of wanting to eventually get a story published. And it's very discouraging to not see them get paid off, to put all this investment into it and to not see any sort of return on what you've already put in. But unfortunately, we don't control that outcome. As much as we sacrifice towards our goals, there's no entitlement to ever have those pay off. There's no written thing out there that says you've given up such and such, therefore you are going to receive such and such in return for your sacrifice. It's a gamble. The process of getting published as a writer is a gamble. And unfortunately, you only get one pull at that slot machine. You write your novel and you send it off. And in the act of sending it off, you are pulling that lever on that slot machine, hoping that you're getting the 3 little bars to line up. But it's a gamble. The sacrifices you've made do not guarantee it. And unfortunately, the odds never seem to favor us. It is, again, a very cold sort of reality. But the good news, the, I guess, better perspective on it is that each story you send off is another chance to pull that lever on that slot machine. Each book you write, you are giving yourself another chance to play. And so your past failures do not guarantee any kind of future rejection in the same way that your past sacrifices don't guarantee any sort of future acceptance. It's a fresh slate every time. It is a new chance to go forward. And there is something within us that keeps us going forward to that. There's something within, I think, our minds, and it's at least probably partially delusion, that we think we're going to be the ones to break the odds. We're going to be the ones to sort of surpass what seems to be written out there for all of us. It might be 100 to 1, but I am that 1 in 100 person. We all think that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But the fact that we can go forward and that we can re-examine our work and improve is what gives us those better odds. That is what makes the 100 to 1 odds a much more favorable game for us. And it's a game you can play your whole life. If you're a creative, especially if you're a writer, you can do this basically until dementia sets in. Hopefully it's many, 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 many years away. And no one's stopping you. And so I don't know how to end this. And in fact, I feel bad for saying this was going to be a short video because it turned out to be much longer than I hoped. But it's a good lesson to hear. It's a good message for us going forward, because I think everyone at some point is going to face this question of, should I go forward, and what are the reasons to actually go forward? What are the reasons to stay in this game? And so I guess if this was helpful for you, certainly I am glad. With that, I don't really have any kind of sign off here for this. And so I guess I'll just leave it at, if you enjoyed it, obviously give it a thumbs up. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And so with that, I will see you all next week. Thank you so much for listening to this. Again, probably the most somber video I've made, but boy, I think we all at certain points need to hear this. And so with that, I'm signing off now, and I will see you all next week.